Australia's #1 breakfast show. Alan Jones on 2GB 873. 2GB.
It's 15 after 7. One of the great emerging issues in this federal election year, and we're going to hear a good deal about it, is a very simple issue of the confiscation of people's property rights without appropriate compensation. This was the issue that led to that big demonstration in Canberra that I addressed some weeks ago. Basically, in order to meet the Kyoto protocols, the Commonwealth has used trees as carbon sinks. They'll swallow up the carbon. But the Commonwealth has sought to meet those Kyoto protocols by having the states do the dirty work. As a result, farmers can't clear their land, the trees must remain there, and there's no compensation for all of this because under state constitutions, compensation does not have to be paid. But it's not just that. People are having their water entitlements taken away from them. No compensation. People are having timber areas converted into national parks. No compensation. This strikes at the heart of very fundamental human rights. And it is going to be an election issue, the issue of confiscation without compensation. Towards the end of last year, I spoke to Noel Pearson, a revered figure who's arguing over and over again for sensible management of Aboriginal issues. He's been trying for years to simply encourage Aborigines to take their place in the mainstream economy, which is a quantum shift from what's gone on for years. But there's been an issue that has emerged central to all of this, and that is that the ALP at a Queensland and federal level and the Greens have joined together to try to win marginal seats. It's not idle to argue that Labor governments may be in government simply because of the Greens' vote. At the last state election, and I've told you about this before, in Queensland, Anna Bligh thought she was in trouble. In order to win seats in metropolitan Brisbane, and you can argue that federally as well, Labor decided to go green to the detriment of Aboriginal development in North Queensland. Now, everyone's in favour of conservation, but can you imagine that there would be better people to conserve the Cape York Peninsula than the Indigenous people who've lived there all their life? Surely no one is suggesting that local Indigenous communities aren't the best placed to manage their land and their environment. Surely no one's going to argue that Indigenous people and local communities aren't the natural stewards of Cape York Peninsula. Well, Noel Pearson and his brother have dedicated their father's land as a national park, done for the benefit of all Australians. But what he says is needed is a balance between the right to establish sustainable businesses and securing the national environment, which brings us to this Wild Rivers legislation. Legislation which was designed to win Anna Bligh seats in metropolitan Brisbane and win Green support across Australia for the Labor Party by denying Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal stakeholders who live in that region in North Queensland, or the so-called Wild Rivers of North Queensland, a solid economic base. Now, this might sound removed from all of us, but the reality is whether it comes to emissions trading schemes or Noel Pearson fighting for self-determination of Aborigines, the Greens have taken their arguments too far. Tony Abbott has, as a result, moved a private member's bill to overturn the Queensland Wild Rivers legislation. And this week that was shunted off to the Senate Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee, and Noel Pearson has appeared before that. He told the Senate inquiry into Tony Abbott's bill, because it's been hived off there, that the Queensland legislation basically was racist, and that Anna Bligh's Wild Rivers Act and Kevin Rudd's failure to repeal it, showed that they had abandoned Labor's commitment to land rights by blocking the economic development of Indigenous land. Noel Pearson's joined me in the studio. Noel, good morning.
Good morning, Alan.
You've had a battle in Canberra.
Absolutely.
And you told the Senate Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee that the exercise of traditional rights is important, but it will never lift your people out of poverty and misery. You've got to be able to undertake land use.
Alan, it's 2010, and it's absolutely extraordinary that Aboriginal people in remote Australia are being told that the only viable way they should live is the way we lived 250 years ago. And for thousands of years before that. That's the pressure that's being put on Aboriginal people right across remote and northern Australia. We're being told that the only legitimate way to live is the way you lived when you picked berries, when you hunted, when you gathered. But the business of living a modern economy and gaining income from the land is illegitimate. And there's a huge pressure on. And we find ourselves at a juncture where the environment movement has basically said that land rights is only the capacity to say no to things. It does not include the right to say yes to things. And it's put us in a real hole.
How impressive is this bloke? You are a most impressive Australian. Anna Bligh, your issue is that Anna Bligh has declared 3 major waterways and all that feed into it, but mainly the Archer, the Stewart and the Lockhart rivers. She's imposed these restrictions. Basically, am I right in saying that for a kilometre either side, a kilometre's a hell of a long way, either side of these rivers, the Aboriginal people can't touch it?
They're high preservation zones, so-called. And the places where people want to live, the places where people want to grow any kind of horticulture, will be normally within a kilometre of a river.
But hang on, first point. You're omitting one point, aren't you? Because it's your land.
Absolutely. And this land was
set aside. Confiscation of your land.
This was Aboriginal reserve land set aside 100 years ago.
So to win a vote, pretend we're very, very green, and that happened. She did win the votes, didn't she? She got them.
She did.
In metropolitan Australia, to the detriment of your people.
Southeastern Queensland was the subject of all of this. That was the purpose of all of this legislation. Votes in southeastern Queensland. It had nothing to do with conservation. What it had to do was winning the support of conservation groups to do the legwork in southeastern Queensland on her behest.
And not just southeastern Queensland, it'll carry over and gain the benefit in other electorates, marginal electorates, with Greens preferences. And so that's the rivers, their tributaries, their catchments. So it's not just the big ones, the Archer, the Lockhart and the Stewart, it's the Watson, the Ducey, the Olive, the Jackie, the Pasco rivers, all incorporated in this legislation.
Absolutely. And when they say 3 rivers, actually the real count, is 13 in this first wave. And there are 13 rivers that separately drain into the sea. But, you know, all of the spin and the obfuscation says that there's 3 rivers. But the reality is that they don't talk about rivers. They don't talk about catchments. They talk about basins. There are 3 basins that are captured by this scheme.
And this is where Indigenous Australians live, and they are prevented from starting up anything within a kilometre either side of any of those rivers or catchment areas.
The problem is the Australian public down south envisage Cape York Peninsula in an incorrect way. Cape York is as big as the state of Victoria. It is an area the size of the state of Victoria, and you're precluding a whole lot of opportunity on the part of the people who live there, Indigenous and non-Indigenous.